We're going to continue on in our series looking at the book of Acts. Today we hit one of the most pivotal moments in all of Acts, one of the pivotal moments for the gospel spreading throughout Acts. So this is where something happens that completely changes the outlook for Christians and completely changes the outlook for one particular person. Now, as I was preparing this, I was reminded of the change in direction and how kind of dramatic that can be sometimes. And I was trying to think through times in my life that has happened. Now, I haven't had the same kind of experience that what we're going to see here, like that kind of dramatic one. But where I have had it is the GPS telling me I'm going the wrong way. The number of times where sometimes it's the GPS's fault and it kind of takes a little bit of time to update. Sometimes it is just mine of I think I know better and then I get told I don't. And when that's the case, what happens is I'll start driving and I'll be driving along and I'll see the road or whatever and I'll drive it further. I'll go, oh, well, look, I'll just go this way because I think it might be quicker. And the GPS will register that pretty quickly. Normally, if it goes, oh yeah, it's about the same and you can go this way. But there are some times where you're traveling along and you're going along and you're feeling fine, or maybe you haven't got the GPS on and maybe I'll be driving along and go, oh, I'm not actually too sure about where I am. And I'll ask Rach to chuck it on for me and she'll put it on or it'll be on. But it'll pop up and it'll just go, make a U-turn when available. You got to turn around. You're going the wrong way. Well, today we look at how somebody who was going the wrong way and confident about the way they were going, they were absolutely confident about the way they were going, how there's an interaction they have that completely changes their direction. They change everything about themselves, basically. Some things, their passion stays the same, but it's redirected from where it was going, which was the wrong way, pretty much 180 to a completely different way. So I'm going to read first for us, because it's right at the start of our chapter. So we're up to chapter 9. Do encourage you to read the whole thing. I'm going to read just a little bit for us to start off with, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it, and then kind of what happens after that in chapter 9 a little bit. So chapter 9, verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul, so we talked about him last week, he started off, people laid their cloaks at his feet while they stoned Stephen and killed him. Then it says he approved of their killing them. Then we have the story of the account of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch and how he hears the gospel and wants to get baptized straight away and then goes back home basically praising God. So you'd imagine he's going to be sharing the gospel as he goes. So that's what we had last week. This week, we get to chapter 9. Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went up to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city and you'll be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes he could see nothing. So they led him by hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. So what we see, and we'll get to the rest of it later, and as you can see there's a bottle that is currently unlit. So what we see is Saul is so keen, he is so keen to persecute the Christians, to persecute anyone who's claimed to be a Christian, that he's going to get letters and travel to Damascus. It is a long trip. It is a long, long trip. I spoke about this in our Galatians series where Paul went and how it all happened and all the rest of it. Damascus is a long way. It's not an easy walk. It is a long, long walk. You could look it up on Google distance too. I can't quite remember what it was, but it's a solid trip. I think it's like 180 Ks or something like that by foot. It is a long way. And so Saul is so keen, that's what he's going to do. And he gets these letters and he's on his way to Damascus. And while he's on his way, because he wants to see if there's anyone in Damascus who believe, turns out there is, he doesn't know it yet, but he's on his way and he's confronted by Jesus. And Jesus says to him, why are you persecuting me? Now, Saul, as he's laying on the ground, now we know him as Paul later on, he changes his name, but Saul, as he's laying on the ground, as this is happening, he realizes that he's talking to God because he says, Lord, who are you? He says, I'm Jesus who you're persecuting. So Saul, whose mind was so angled towards persecuting Christians, anyone who followed this Jesus guy, who clearly must be wrong, so keen that he was going to go to Damascus to kill them. So he's going past Judea, through Samaria. He's going to Damascus, long trip. He wants to take them prisoner and bring them back to Jerusalem. That's what he wants to do. And along the way, he encounters Jesus. He's confronted by Jesus, who completely changes his path. So while he's on the way to Damascus, his whole life is changed. He's blinded. He finds out that the person he's been persecuting is Jesus, is God. His life changes. Now, he actually does end up getting to Damascus. He does end up making it. So Paul, on the way, he rocks up to Damascus, and while he's there, he hangs out there for 3 days, and there's a guy called Ananias. Now, Ananias is a believer, and he is told by God, go to this particular house. You're going to find a bloke there named Saul. He's blind. You need to heal him. Now, think about this for Ananias. He knows who this Saul bloke is, because that's what he says to God. He's like, I'm fairly sure he's been kind of persecuting and arresting anyone who follows you, Jesus. So kind of a big ask. But he goes. That's huge. That is unbelievably trusting and faithful of Ananias. Ananias is a hero in chapter 9. We don't ever really talk about him, but he's super important. He is willing to follow Jesus and go and meet Saul, who he knows has come to Damascus to arrest Christians. And Ananias is going to walk into the house and heal him in the name of Jesus. Why would you heal someone like that? Now, of course, he doesn't know the encounter, the confrontation that Saul has had that has completely changed his mind. He doesn't know that. He's got to trust God, and he does, and he goes, and he heals Saul. And we see the change. So Saul was on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians, to persecute anyone who belonged to the way, to persecute them, to arrest them, bring them back to Jerusalem, where obviously from last time, it used to be big, but everyone's scattered out, and there's persecution happening in Jerusalem. He wants to bring them back where they can kind of be in front of the Sanhedrin and be punished and all the rest of it. That's what he wants to do. That's how passionate he is. But then, because he actually meets Jesus, he understands who Jesus is. He goes from doing that. In 3 days, while he's in Damascus, Ananias comes and heals him. Immediately he goes out, start preaching that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Now, as you'd imagine, that is crazy. Anyone in Damascus has heard about this bloke who's so keen and so passionate and persecuted Christians, and they actually say, isn't this the same bloke who's turned over Jerusalem to find Christians and persecute them? Isn't this the same guy? What has changed in his life? I mean, that's a huge witness. That's massive to be able to say, that's a big witness to go, that's what I was like, this is what I'm like now. And so people are hearing this and they're believing, and obviously Damascus already had Christians in it, but it is going to get more because of what Paul has done. It's unbelievable what happens based on just a change in your mind. How could Saul, who go from being so single-mindedly focused on persecuting Christians, how could he go from that to, I'm going to Damascus to persecute and imprison? How could he go from that to complete 180 of, hey, I want to tell everyone, Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. You should follow Jesus. It's a complete change. And one that wouldn't happen just because he wants to. That's not a positive change for him. I talk about in Galatians, in the series we're doing at night, Paul says it quite a bit. On this path, on his single-minded persecution of the church, he is on a great career path. He's advancing beyond his years. He's nailing it. Worldly wise, he is nailing it. Life is only going to get better for Paul. And then because he meets Jesus, complete change. And he gets shipwrecked, and he gets put in prison, and he gets flogged. Life is not good and cruisy and smooth for Saul after he converts, after he understands who Jesus is. You don't do that because you want to. Something had to change in Paul. He saw that Jesus was real, understood who Jesus was, and his life changed, completely changed. Now, for the rest of chapter 9, I do encourage you to read it, but what we do see is Peter traveling around. So we see he goes to a whole bunch of places. Now, that's kind of Judea and Samaria kind of places, so nowhere too drastic, but he goes around and he meets a couple of people, and we see how the gospel, how the good news of Jesus is changing people's lives in Lydda and Joppa and places like that, where Peter has gone and said, oh, there's believers there, and they're shining their light. What we're continuing to see in Acts, and I really want you to hear this, is Jesus is real and he changes lives. All of these places, there would be Jews living there who are hearing about Jesus and going, oh yeah, cool, no worries, I'll follow them. But there'd be people who aren't Jewish, Gentiles, so anyone who's not Jewish, so you and I would be Gentiles. Anyone who's not Jewish is hearing about this Jesus guy and he's changing their lives. We see a huge change in souls, a drastic change in souls. What we can see in Acts 9 is that Jesus is real and he's changing lives, and his gospel is spreading, and as it spreads, people are hearing the good news and they're seeing that good news in action. So for us, as we look at Acts chapter 9, we've got to see, well, our lives have got to be emulating that of well, Jesus has changed our lives. If you don't know Jesus, I want you to know he can change your life. He is life-changing. Sorry, he's not can. He will change your life. He's life-changing, and it's good. He's worth all the pain that Paul went. We're not going to go through the pain Paul went through. Saul, Paul, when he changed his name, there's, like I said, shipwrecks, he's beaten, he's put in prison, he's mocked. Now, we're probably not going to go through that severity of things, but anything that does happen, Jesus is beyond worth it. It's the best thing in the world. Definitely the best thing in the world. Now, if you are a believer, if you are a follower of Jesus, then what we can see when we look at Acts chapter 9 is that followers of Jesus tell others about Jesus. That it should just be a natural thing. The reason I want to tell you about Jesus and I want you to hear about Jesus is because he's awesome. It's because it's such a good thing to hear about. When we have good news, we share it. Jesus is good news. That's what the gospel is, good news. So hopefully as you watch today, as you read through Acts chapter 9, you're encouraged, if you're a follower of Jesus, to talk about him because he's amazing. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, to think about following him and ask God to come into your life and to follow Jesus, because it is the best thing in the world. And I want you to experience how good it is. Have a great week.